Fourthly, what I will call irrational love and permanent disagreements. Irrational love and permanent disagreements. Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment? And he responds this way in Matthew chapter 22, verse 37 to 38. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So the first commandment is love the Lord your God with every faculty you have. And the second commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. You see, there is a third kind of love mentioned in this, and that is self-love. But in this case, self-love is assumed. Jesus assumes that you have self-love because everybody has self-love. I suggest that self-love is an irrational love. Self-love is an irrational love. C.S. Lewis, in his book Mere Christianity, on the chapter on forgiveness, talks about self-love. Well, how exactly do I love myself? Now that I come to think of it, I have not exactly got a feeling of fondness or affection for myself, and I do not even always enjoy my own society. Do I think well of myself? Think myself a nice chap? Well, I'm afraid I sometimes do. And those are no doubt my worst moments. But that is not why I love myself. In fact, it is the other way around. My self-love makes me think myself nice. But thinking myself nice is not why I love myself. In my most clear-sighted moments, not only do I think myself a nice man, but I know that I am a very nasty one. I can look at some of the things I have done with horror and loathing. However much I might dislike my own cowardice or conceit or greed, I went on loving myself. There had never been the slightest difficulty about it. In fact, the very reason why I hated the things I did was that I loved the man that did it. Just because I loved myself, I was sorry to find that I was the sort of man who did those things. We tolerate ourselves and love ourselves way more than we tolerate anybody else and we love anybody else. Self-love, I think, is the most irrational love. But right next to self-love, the next irrational love is family love. I think family love is also an irrational love, not as much as self-love. Let me give you a couple examples. Our family is involved in drug and alcohol rehab, and we've done it for the last almost 2 decades now. And we have people who come to our centers who've been on drugs or alcohol for 10, 20, 30 years, and their lives are completely messed up, and now here they are. After the first few years of using drugs, a person's resources are kind of used up. But what happens after that is that their mother or their parents give them the money to go buy drugs. They know in their mind that that's not the right thing to do, but yet they cannot see their child suffer, and so they enable that habit, and that goes on until they have used up all their parents' money as well. You see, it is an irrational love. Let me give you another example. Let's say that your 18-year-old son was driving his car for the first time, and in a lonely road he accidentally hit somebody and the person died. Your son comes back home and says, nobody knows about it, nobody saw me. No matter what you think, what is your first instinct? Is your first instinct to call the police on your son? That's the right thing to do, but usually the first instinct is to protect your son, right? There are many examples where family members protect criminals because of family love. It is irrational, but family love is irrational. So when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, yes, we have self-love and it is irrational. We have family love, that is also irrational. So all we need to do is love our neighbor like our family and like ourselves, just in the irrational way that we love ourselves. I'm not suggesting that you cover up crimes for your neighbor and church member and help them escape. Nope, that is not what I'm saying. If the church is a family, do we have an irrational love for the church members? On the other side of irrational love is disagreements. Do you have disagreements in your family? Of course you do. Every family has disagreements. In Luke chapter 22, verse 24, it says, a dispute also arose among them as to which of them was to be regarded as the greatest. And the Greek word for dispute is the word ready to argue. These are the disciples that have left their families, they have come together, now this is their family. Who is the head of the family? The head of the family is the Prince of Peace. And yet, these disciples have disagreements, disputes, and readiness to argue. I suggest that a family that has disagreements has a closer bond than a family that has no disagreements whatsoever. Why? Because we are fallen human beings. And as fallen human beings, we have our own idiosyncratic tendencies and our own individual quirks. And the moment we come closer to somebody else, we have the tendency to annoy each other. That's just human. You just have to get close to anybody, and you can be annoyed and annoy somebody else. It doesn't change whether we are believers or not. In fact, if you and your spouse are Christians, believers, growing, do you have disagreements? Of course you do. So it doesn't matter whether you're believers or not. The fact that we're human makes us have disagreements as we get closer to people. In fact, in our houses, you can have a disagreement that keeps recurring. Do you have a disagreement with your spouse where you had the disagreement and several months later the same disagreement pops up? And several months later the same disagreement pops up. It's not like you had a disagreement, you came together, you understood each other's side, and you agreed, and now you are in agreement on that one topic. No. You are in disagreement, you disagree, and you move away and continue to disagree. So it doesn't matter whether we are believers or not. If that is true, then we should allow for disagreements in the church. I suggest that a church family with disagreements is a closer church family than one that has absolutely no disagreements. Why? Because it shows a closer bond. I'm not suggesting that we go out and start fights with people that we don't like. We should allow for disagreements in the church because it shows a closer bond. And if we allow for disagreements in the church, then people won't think there's a problem when there is a disagreement. Right now we think everything has to be smooth and calm and quiet and a spirit-filled, peaceful life, and we don't allow for disagreements. So when something happens, people think there's a problem. And also by allowing for disagreements, we can learn to live together with the disagreement, just like we live together with disagreements in a family. And it may be so that the same disagreement may keep popping up again and again in the church between the same two people, just like it does in the family, but that's okay. If we have talked about it and if we have agreed that it's okay to disagree and continue to live. But both go together. Irrational love and disagreements go together. If we get close to people enough to have irrational love, then we will have disagreements. But if you're having disagreements only but not irrational love, well, then there's some other problem.